Το λειτουργικό μέλος των Μελχιτών, when we say, I want to just introduce the term of the Melkite, what does it mean? Maybe in Greece, many of us, or the Greeks, they don't know this term of Melkite. The Melkites are the who adopted the Chalcedonian faith. So they have been, they followed the king of Vasilevs, and that's why they have called Melkite, because of the origin term, which is Melko in the Syriac language. So they have been called Melkites. So the Melkites are the Orthodox, all the Orthodox in the Antiochian part. And now we can say that in Lebanon and Syria we have two sort of Melkites. Now the Orthodox, they cannot say the Greek Melkite Orthodox. They say the Greek Melkite Catholics, because after the separation in 1724 between in the Orthodox Church, the schisma in the Orthodox Church, they have been separated to Catholics and Orthodox. The Melkite Liturgical Chant, musical forms and structures, oral and written tradition. I will try to expose some, I don't know if there's a problem in the manuscripts, or I will try to fix it. Unity of the Antiochian musical tradition. We have the unity. In general, chants of the Greek Melkite Catholic Church were never separated from the chants of the Greek Orthodox Church, as per the forms and structures, as well as the written and oral tradition, including within the period following the schisma of the Church of Antioch. The Byzantine musical tradition has always been the standard before the schisma that occurred in the Patriarchate of Antioch in 1724, and has always represented such a standard during the major part of the following period. Pioneers of the Arabic liturgy, the Greek Melkite Catholic composers have transmitted the musical Byzantine heritage from Greek to Arabic, even though many of them were influenced by the Constantinopolitan style in the written and oral tradition. Hence, Greek Melkite Catholic musicians must be classified into different categories according to their source of inspiration. The influence of Oriental singing, it is both for the Catholics and the Orthodox. The influence of Oriental singing, the Greek style of Constantinople, as well as other influences such as the Greek Orthodox Antiochian chanters, especially those in Damascus, and much later polyphony. Thus, Greek Melkite Catholic chanting may be not separated in its structure and basic musical forms from the Orthodox chant, at least in the early stage of the life of the Melkite Church, until the early 20th century. The difference, whenever existing, does not lie within the liturgical text, which remains the same, but rather in a different musical expression. Now I have to talk a little bit about the innovations of the Greek Melkite Catholics, and it's some of the difference between the Orthodox and the Catholics in the region of Lebanon, how the chanting, of course, and the interpretations. So the innovations of the Greek Melkite Catholics, polyphony appeared in a very recent period, in 1920, between 1920 and 1963, with Father Abel Couturier in 1930, and the works, of course, of Sakalaridis. Such type, projected by the Greek Orthodox of Antioch, was disseminated by the Greek Melkite Catholic liturgy, under the influence of the missionaries of Africa, the White Fathers, and the works of Sakalaridis, which has developed a very primitive two-voice chanting system. Sakalaridis adapted the traditional melodies in the Western musical system. The works of Father Couturier appeared later, and according to Archimandritis Antoine Hebbe, Couturier was the first to introduce such system in the Melkite church and the Catholic part. Recent Melkite authors are usually based in the musical compositions in Arabic on Byzantine works of Sakellarides, which were simplified and easier to perform the choir. Such trend caused a decline in traditional compositions, hence of the performance of musical signs and the energy they transmitted by the oral and written tradition. Therefore, it is undeniable that the Melkites have introduced a specific style and a character to the written tradition, especially with the introduction of the Western notation. However, the constant and prevailing issue in the Byzantine chant remains the style of interpretation. In other words, the oral tradition remains the essential criterion of such liturgical music. Between history and manuscripts, we have witnessing manuscripts, musical notation, and language. The Melkites used Syriac language for centuries, preceding the fall of Constantinople, until the area of the 17th century, especially in the village and monasteries located far from major cities where the Greek dominated, being the main language in the territories of the Byzantine Empire, and especially the liturgical language of the fathers and scholars of the Chalcedonian Church in the East. We all know that, must know that the Melkites used the Syriac language before, especially in the period in most of the monasteries and the village are located far from the cities, because in the cities there in this period the Greek was dominating the Greek language. So Melkite manuscripts clearly illustrates the liturgical language and navmata, names or signs of the Byzantine music, which are used and identified in the period dubbed as the Meso-Byzantine, which represent a milestone in the development of notation. Indeed, scores of origin called ekphonetics consisted of simple accents placed on the text, acting as a reminder for the chanter. The notation has been enriched over the centuries and achieved its full development and clearest expression through the most accurate Meister Cucuzellis. I wanted to expose okay, this manuscript that I have to show, it is να προχωρούμε.
Λέει να παίξουμε.
Εντάξει, δεν μπορούμε να παίξουμε. Μετά. Εντάξει. The manuscript was restored on Japanese paper in Italy at the Basili Monastery of Grottaferrata. It is composed of liturgical chants in Syriac for the feast of the presentation of Jesus to the temple, Papandi, written in Estrangolo character. Such style, the Estrangolo, of written has been used for calligraphy by the Chaldeans as well as the Melkites under the 15th century. The manuscript of St. John Monastery in Khanshara provides an insight of the usage of the notation system called Kukuzalite. The introduction of Arabic, as ever mentioned, offices and the divine liturgy were first performed in Greek and Syriac until the early 17th century. The Greek language was dominant in cities and understood by many speakers of Aramaic. Following the 17th century, the tradition was still spoken in Greek and Arabic as the Renaissance at the time of the musical composition in Arabic between 1920 and 1963. The 17th and 18th century witnessed the introduction of the Arabic language in the liturgy. Manuscripts and old books state that the translation from Greek into Arabic lacked poetry in that period. We didn't have so much good Arabic in this period. It was very weak poetry in Arabic. So Orthodox attempts to chant in Arabic remained scarce, and the majority of chanted prayers remained in Greek. So they chanted in Greek, and the lectures was in Arabic, while readings were in Arabic. The 19th century was a milestone for the composition in Arabic, and the most shining in the Church of Antioch, which, with the appearance of the first fully translated offices and the works of the famous Greek Orthodox protopsal, Demetrius Elmor, in the Greek Melkite Catholic camps. The reform of 1814 had provided an edition of the liturgical books accomplished in 1839, which preserves the entire Byzantine heritage transcribed by the inspirers of the said reform, particularly in the main monasteries. We have the Saint Saviour, the Basilian Salvatorian, in June in Saida, this is a Melkite Catholic monastery, and the Saint John Basilian Shweirit in Khanshara, which is located in Lebanon, the two monasteries. So in the early 20th century, Father Abel Couturier, member of the White Fathers community, which served the Melkite Church, the Melkite Catholic Church, was the first to introduce a new system, the polyphony. Subsequently, Archimandritis Antoine Hebbe published the full resurrection service in 1939, followed by the Paulist Father in 1944 and the Salvatorian Fathers in 1947. It is to be mentioned that during that period, the Melkite chanting was heavily influenced by the works of the ever-mentioned Greek chanter Ioannis Sakellaridis, considered by Archimandrite Antoine Hebbe as the most famous composer of the 20th century in his domain. On the other hand, the arch-protopsalt of the Church of Constantinople, the researcher and musicologist Lykurgos Angelopoulos, reckoned the works of Sakellaridis as representing a musical deviation which had a harmful influence on many Greek and Melkite chanters. Now, the adaptation of the Byzantine hymnology into Arabic raised a specific issue. It is a language that is written from right to left, to Dexia, Aristera, while the Greek text and musical notations attached to it are to be read from the left to right. Hence, efforts were deployed, relying on trial and error by adopting miscellaneous types of musical writings during this period. We have three types of musical writing. We have the musical writing with reversed note, anapoda. Signs of the Byzantine music were calligraphed with a mirror effect, so supposed to compensate the opposite direction of the text and notation. So they have made the ison anapoda in grammena. No. The musical writing, this is the second type, the musical writing from left to right with reversion of the Arabic language that we use in our Orthodox chanting in the Orthodox book, which the proto-psaltic is in Arabic. Mitri al-Mul have written the musical writing from left to right was in which the priority is to the former. It is indeed kept as it is. The Arabic text is divided and laid from the left to the right to match each corresponding musical signs. The currently used musical notation reading notes from the right to left without reversing them, without reversing neither the characters or the signs, and without reversing the Arabic language. Just we can read the Eson from the other side and not reverse the Eson or any character or sign. These various types provide an insight of the attempt performed by the Greek Melkite Catholics in order to preserve the Byzantine notation while respecting the Arabic structure. They wanted to respect the Arabic without reversing the Arabic language. If we want to read the notation from left to right, as in Greek notation, we have to reverse the Arabic. So when we chant in Arabic, we want to, the Arabic language is divided. It's something that we use, but without, reversing the notes. At the instigation of his beatitude, we can pass this. Okay. Hence, melodies currently used in the Melkite Church are based on the works of Greek origin, the Melkite, of course, Catholics, but also on the compositions of Basilian Salvatorian monks such as Fathers Kyrillos Haddad, Yusuf Nakhli, Basilios Khoury, Basilios Assis, and Ignatius Sad, as well as the Archimandritis Boutros Jarejiri, in addition to members of the Order of the St. Paul Ministries and the Greek Orthodox composer of Antioch, the famous proto-psaltist Mitri al-Mul. Violetta. If I want to talk about a little bit of the analysis of the oral tradition, the influence of the oral tradition in Antioch, in Lebanon and Syria, I can make a conclusion that, as I have concluded, that the influences are very interesting influences from the Constantinople style of chant, because as I have written here, from Antioch to Constantinople and back, aller-retour. So I can a little bit introduce the oral tradition in order to make the influence of the proto-psalts of Constantinople after the reform of 1814 and the spreading of new music system in the Greek Orthodox as well as the Greek Melkite Catholic Church of Antioch was quite important and considerably noticeable between 1821 from Yusuf Domani proto-psaltis and 1960. So the beginning of this period witnessed the musical reform initiated in 1860 by chanters such as Petros Byzantios and Ioannis Byzantios, who considerably influenced their colleagues in Antioch. Mitri Elmer and other proto-psalts tried to chant according to the Constantinople style. The references are chanters like Danielidis, Pringos, Stanitsas, Nafliotis. Some of them, such as the renowned Elias Simonides, even moved to Damascus, where their presence and example echoed for a long time. this influence could take a different path as Antiochian chanters would return to the very source of Byzantine music. Father Elias Jad'oun, whose mentor was the Salvatorian priest Basilios Khouri, left his country of origin to undergo a long period of training in Greece. Some of his contemporaries stated that he impressed the Greeks by his unprecedented voice. It has also been stated that he had relationships with chanters of Jerusalem and Damascus. His rare records that are left in our hand assert that he had performed the Greek style of Constantinople, also known as the Istanbul style. Jad'oun or Yadeon became a school on its own right, and he inspired many chanters who knew him. We have many of chanters there in the Catholic and in the Orthodox section. We have Asad Smeha, we have many of them that I would like to introduce, but we don't have such or much time. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry. So I have to finish. Sorry.
Thank you very much.